Welcome at last to the story of another road trip and another racetrack. On this occasion, the road trip adds just a little over 600 miles to the 289,000 already covered by our trusty NSX. That 9-hour commute takes us from eastern Tennessee up to northeastern Ohio. There, in the countryside between Akron and Warren, amid farm tracks and forests, we find one of the oldest road courses in the Buckeye State. A circuit steeped in history and a racetrack currently on the rebound. Please join me in exploring Nelson Ledges, the 27th track on our lap of the world. Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. I'm Richard and this is Lap of the World. Once again, your home for road trips and racetracks, because today we have made the few 100-mile jaunt up from East Tennessee to Northern Ohio to visit historic Nelson Ledges. Built in 1958 over the top of a potato farm, Nelson Ledges had already been reconfigured once and paved prior to Mid-Ohio's ribbon cutting in 1962. By my reckoning, that makes Nelson Ledges the oldest active road course in Ohio, built only a few years later than Midwestern regional great Road America. This track has an impressive resume for a circuit of its modest 2-mile length. That said, if you're a track enthusiast of Gen X or later, or you don't live in the eastern Midwest of the United States, you could be forgiven for, at this point, asking, Nelson where? If, however, you followed Trans Am or a few other major sports car series in the 1970s, you should probably know exactly where I mean. Let me try to ring a bell with the rest of you, though, using some probably more familiar names. Peter Gregg, Bob Tullius, Hurley Haywood, Al Holbert, Andy Pilgrim, Bryce Cobb, Parker Johnstone, Michael Andretti, Danny Sullivan, and Peter Cunningham, or for you non-racing nerds who just ended up on this part of YouTube, Steve McQueen, Paul Newman, and Tom Cruise have, in addition, all turned laps at Nelson Ledges. In its heyday, it was at least for a few years an annual fixture on the SCCA Trans Am calendar, at a time when that series was fighting for preeminence in North American production sports car racing with the IMSA GT series. Starting in 1980, the track also hosted an annual 24-hour race, the Longest Day of Nelson, that served originally as a standalone event, but later became a stop on the SCCA's Playboy Endurance Cup series until the late 80s, when it resumed as an amateur event until the mid-90s. With all of that history in mind, though, what is it like to drive in all of those tire tracks in 2021? Let's find out.
Morning.
Morning, how you doing?
All right, you're good to go.
Thanks, sir. All right, first time on Nelson Ledges. After talking to some of the experienced guys and instructors here, just kind of trying to figure my way around here without getting in too much trouble. Words of wisdom for today are that everything is a late apex, the track is very fast, and very unforgiving if you lose it. So, we are going to exercise an abundance of caution in this first session, so don't expect any lap records. I'm trying to drive the lines that I watched in the video, and generally not getting anybody's way. And one thing that I did, the first place I went off in virtual land was in this carousel, because it has like 8 apexes, and if you miss one, then you're all kinds of toast. Skipping some incoherent in-car narration, your lap of Nelson Ledges begins as you pass under the bridge and set up for a fast right-hand turn 1. Manage your speed, find the late apex, and use a little curb on the way out, and you should have just enough time to straighten the wheel before turning into a nearly as fast turn 2. Turn 3 calls for a late entry before tucking your car to the inside curb using the friendly camber and getting on the throttle early for a good exit. Next is the Carousel and Good Luck. On paper, it has 4 apexes. In reality, it requires good judgment of grip and a lot of patience to not apex too soon and find out how little room there is on the exit. Turn 10 on paper really isn't one at these speeds, but a tidy apex makes for the shortest distance to the braking zone for turn 11, otherwise known as the kink. This is a turn, and a ballsy one at that. Get it right and you'll have just enough time to point the car track right and brake hard for the turn 12-13 complex. I found exiting 12 to mid-track was my ticket to a good entry for 13, but I've seen more than one line work here. 13, the slowest turn, deposits you back onto the front straight and across the line, completing a lap of this entertaining circuit. Alright, I'm going to stop narrating now because I think it's probably devolved into incoherency, but we have turned our first few laps at Nelson Ledges now. We are not upside down in the tire barrier, so we'll call it a success, and I will see you guys back in the pits. Alright, so back in the paddock after one session in the books, and my hot take is that Nelson Ledges is a very surprisingly fast and definitely very nuanced track. You know, I kind of figured out or had some suspicions looking at watching the video that I watched and doing the sim driving that I did that your kind of average speed around here was going to be quick, but you know, again, it's one thing to see it, it's another thing to actually do it and feel it. So that was a little bit of a calibration session, but I think in the first session I was able to intuitively figure out most of the track. I think this is going to fall into that category similar to what I said about Roebling Road, in that getting to like 85% competence at the track is going to be easy. Getting to like 90-95% competency is going to be really difficult and take probably a lot of repetitions, probably more repetitions than I'll be able to get in today. But to that end though, I kind of enlisted a little bit of help. After I got back from my first session, I got picked up by the cops, which was interesting. No, by cops I mean Philip, one of the instructors here, was gracious enough to take me around in his retired cruiser and and show me what he considers the line, which should be pretty accurate given how long he's been doing events at this track. So that was good to kind of set that point of reference, but again, I think it'll be definitely is going to take some figuring out, and I will enjoy trying to unlock as much as I can about the nuanced nature of a lap of Nelson Ledges. With a session in the books, I feel like it's time to address an elephant in the room for at least some who may be familiar with this track's history. See, there is a reason that pro racing didn't continue here, and that the 24-hour race stopped after 1996, and why you may have read or heard things that discouraged you from visiting yourself before now. I also should come clean on this myself. It now pains me to admit it, but prior to this year I had not been looking forward to taking the plunge to drive Nelson Ledges. I remember hearing stories from probably a decade ago about the track surface, and the facilities being in a state of disrepair, to put it nicely. To put it less nicely, I'll paraphrase Randy Popes from a 2020 video saying that Nelson Ledges was in fact famous for being in disrepair. After its heyday in the late 70s, it seems the facility was somewhat put on cruise control, regional weather and lack of upkeep took its toll, and by the mid to late 2000s, several organizers and car clubs had canceled events over concerns about the degraded track surface and substandard facilities. The bumpy patchwork track surface from that era was even modeled into the circa 2015 R-Factor mod that I was using to practice. If that sounds wholly incongruous with what you've seen so far in my video, that is because Nelson Ledges has been under new management since around 2016, and efforts have been ongoing to rehabilitate and modernize the entire facility. The track has been resurfaced, portions of the infield have been paved, and the majority of the structures on the ground have either been renovated or replaced at this point. As of my visit in 2021, Nelson Ledges feels like it could have been built in the 2010s, if not for the telltale bridge and giant piles of discarded tires serving as catch fencing. To that latter point, Nelson's refurbishment is an ongoing process, and speaking to Fred, the track manager, he let on that the list of future improvements include more infield paving, updated restroom facilities, and some reconfiguration of runoff areas and those piles of tires. Nelson Ledges is fully a racetrack on the Rebound at this point, and I would honestly recommend it as a great driving experience if you're in the region or passing through. Speaking of experiences, I did want to thank Fred and the staff at Nelson Ledges for accommodating some odd requests, and the event organizers at Autointerests for a well-run event. I'm not sure who was responsible for the weather, but they deserve a raise. Now, having eclipsed my simulator reference time in my first session and then benefited from an accommodating ride-along, and with another couple of sessions to practice after that, let's see what a hopefully competent, if not quick, lap of Nelson Ledges looks like. With a competent, if not spectacular, minute 19.2 on the books and an alternator starting to whine at me a little bit, it was nearly time to pack up, but I don't want to leave without mentioning our hosts, Autointerests. People often ask me for recommendations for track day providers in a given region. Well, if you live in the Midwest, I can give them a solid thumbs up, and I suspect I will end up driving with them again in the future. Sign up was easy, communication was great, the staff were all very friendly and accommodating day of, and the cost was reasonable. That is not a sponsored plug, just an honest review by a paying customer. Reflecting on my day out at Nelson Ledges as I snapped the obligatory "I was here" photo with the sculpture near the gate, Nelson Ledges is really something of a time capsule in a way. You could bring a vintage Mustang or early 911, film things in grainy black and white or 8mm, and it would look convincingly in period save for the cars around you. It's one of the rare tracks that hasn't changed its configuration since the early 60s, and harkens back to an era when tracks were designed by driving around a field and planting some stakes, versus employing a $1 million design firm. The changes that are being made to modernize the track feel like they're intended to maintain that vintage charm, but with modern conveniences. As it sits in 2021, I would fully recommend this circuit as a driving experience, and as a generally nice place to be. I wish the new ownership and management all the best on their continued refurbishment efforts, and the planned resurrection of the longest day of Nelson endurance race next year. If you're considering events in the region, don't pay attention to anything you've heard about Nelson Ledges prior to 2016. This is a track on the rebound and one definitely worth visiting. Thanks to Keith at K9 Aerial Drone Photography, thanks to Tony Mezzacca for the licensed use of his vintage photos, and thanks to all of you for watching. Until the next stop on our journey, I'm Richard. This is Lap of the World, and I will see you all in the next video, if not at the track.